This is the docuseries The Raincoat Killer Chasing a Predator in Korea. Episode 1. When the World War II ended, the Korean peninsula was split in half. This caused economic problems, and around the 2000s they had to request emergency funds from the International Monetary Fund, IMF. Dr. Kim Ji-yoo explains that after the debt was repaid, the people who survived the situation were solely harvesting all the success, while the people who fell behind lost their jobs and ended up on the streets. This is the time the number of assault cases increased and the kidnapping of women and children were more frequent. September 24, 2003, Shinsadong. An elderly couple were killed in their home. They were attacked with a sharp blunt weapon and had their skulls caved in. The case was unusual because the money inside the house was left untouched. October 9, 2003. There had been another murder, this time in Gugidong. The victim's husband reported the crime after he returned home from work. They find the grandmother's body lying on the floor at the entrance of the bathroom. As they went further in, they find the kitchen where the daughter-in-law lay collapsed on the floor in front of the kitchen sink. Her skull was dented badly. Upon going up to the second floor, they find the body of the son, who seemed to have been attacked on his way down. His head had been struck so many times that his brain was scattered everywhere. They had to place blocks on the floor in order not to contaminate the scene, but there was so much blood that they couldn't find a place to place the blocks. But the only upside to this was that they ended up collecting a very faint footprint. October 16, 2003, Samsung-dong. The killer entered the house, dragged the grandmother into the bathroom, and attacked her there. They investigated outside and noticed the outdoor AC unit where they found a very faint shoe print. The Seoul Police Agency had been denying it, saying these cases weren't related. There was a big reluctance to say that this was done by a serial killer because it was a case that could shake up Korea and its citizens. November 18, 2003, Hyewa-dong, Jongno-gu, Seoul. At around 3 p.m., a fire broke out in a two-story house. Both Kim, the 87-year-old owner of the house, and Baek, a 50-year-old housekeeper, were found dead in the living room. A 1-year-old boy survived under his blanket and was taken to the hospital. There was damage done to the safe on the second floor, so they suspected this to be a robbery homicide that ended with arson. The only piece of evidence connecting the cases apart from the blunt force trauma was another matching footprint they found. Each investigation team from separate police stations joined forces to form one unit to investigate the murders, about 80 detectives. After investigating the shoe prints, they were able to identify them as buffalo shoes and able to confirm that the serial killer was wearing those shoes. It was very frustrating. This case was unprecedented in Korea at the time, leaving the police to feel a lot of guilt and pressure. At the time, there was barely any CCTVs in Seoul, but on the main road leading to the fourth crime scene, there was a huge building which had a CCTV camera installed in order to monitor employees entering and leaving the building. There was footage captured. The victim's family recognized the clothes he was wearing, a jacket belonging to the victim's husband, and that's how they were able to prove that this was indeed the killer. They made the decision to go public with the video as well as the footprints. The police distributed leaflets nationwide showing his estimated height, which was 168 centimeters tall, which is about 5'5", and with a 50 million won reward, which is about $7,894. The investigation became quiet and the killing stopped, and it remained unsolved. Episode 2. Rumors started to circulate about a serial killer in southwestern Seoul. Motiveless murders occurred around these areas. Word was that these killings were being committed by the same person, but they were puzzled as to why the MO had changed. The victims were attacked randomly in public spaces such as streets. As Kwon Il-young said himself, it seemed like a different case. They even considered there being two different active serial killers roaming free, which is very rare. This is when we are introduced to Wekbi and Yolshim, who tell us that adult workers can't call the police even when they're exposed to crime, and there are clients who take advantage of that. Also, that adult workers' experiences often go unnoticed because many don't talk to their families and live in isolation, and usually it's assumed they ran away. This leads us to Kim Kang-ja, who was the first female police chief in the country. At the time, they had launched a crackdown on adult workers. The red light district is where these businesses operate. She wanted to protect these girls because they were women in financial trouble. Some of them lured or abducted pimps, threatened her, and even some of her own colleagues slandered her. The killer would call a girl over and had a conversation with her first. They would have dinner. He'd cook instant ramen for her. After doing the deed, the girl would get ready to leave. Then he'd drag her to the bathroom. He called the bathroom door sill the threshold between life and death. In this space, I have complete control over this person's life. That was his mindset. He spent little time killing his victims, but spent most of the time desecrating the bodies. After severing the head, he would tie up their hair in a rubber band and hung it from the toilet paper holder. He even had gone to get x-rays done at the hospital and asked them to burn the results onto a CD so he could study human anatomy and be able to dispose of the victims quicker. So he chopped the bodies into 16 pieces. The water usage at his apartment was about 5 tons because he was washing all these bodies and blood. A rotting body has a stench, so he thought he'd mix them with the pungent smell of kimchi so no one would know. That night, he left his place and hailed a cab. The taxi driver asked him, "What is the smell? Is it kimchi? It smells awful." His reply was, "It's aged kimchi my mom gave me." Now that he was able to dispose of those victims quickly, the frequency of the murders increased. At first, the interval was a month, then it became 15 days, and then he started doing it once a week as he became very skilled at it. One of the owners of the brothel was an ex-cop. He was a pimp who made money off of his ladies. The women he was managing kept disappearing. Someone called the brothel asking for a girl that night, and the owner recognized the number right away because it was one of the girl's numbers who had disappeared. July 15, 2004, that night Yang Pil-ju's phone rang around 2 a.m. It was the informant. This took place in Sinchon. They had to use a woman to catch them, so they got the girl ready, and then almost immediately the phone rang. They asked him where the girl should meet him, and he told them to send her to a small park near Hongik University. Suddenly, the girl starts walking back to them and tells them that he just told her to go. They were wondering why. Turns out she was too tall. He selected women who he thought were easier to kill. If the woman wasn't his preferred size, he would let them go. So he calls for another woman and told her to meet in an alleyway. She called and said there was some weirdo here. I think he's the guy who called. They run over there, and while doing so, they call the police. Park Myun-sun, team leader of the mobile investigation unit, was at home sleeping when Yang Pil-ju calls him to tell him that adult workers were disappearing. When Yang Pil-ju gets there, he sees a man standing there with a bunch of small flyers in his mouth. They arrested him, but if they failed to secure enough evidence, they had to release him within 48 hours of the arrest. Time was of the essence. Park Myun-sun calls Chief Dae-won around 5 a.m. and tells him to come to the station ASAP. The whole team was there to interrogate him. This is where we find out his name is Yoo Young-Chul. He had no tattoos, scars, or anything of that sort. He looked average, a decent-looking man. He asked for a paper that Park Myun-sun had in his hands and started drawing tally marks, and says, "Sir, this is how many people I've killed." They needed to verify this was a killer, so they put him in a car. Young-Chul stated that he killed 2 people in Gugidong. On their way, they pull over a Gugi tunnel, and everybody is forced to get out. This was another test. They wanted to see if he could get to the house which one of the murders took place. He kept giving wrong information. He knew how they would react, so now the detectives were no longer sure if he was the one they were looking for. They brought him back to the interrogation room, but he suddenly has an epileptic seizure and collapses while foaming at the mouth. And because he was showing signs of epilepsy, they uncuffed him. Park Myun-sun goes to leave, and Young-Chul starts following him. He's right behind him. So the other detective comes to the conclusion that Park Myun-sun was taking him with him. Park Myun-sun comes back and asks, "Where did he go?" Detective Kim said, "You didn't take him?" To which he responds, "No, I didn't. Young-Chul had escaped." Episode 3. Everyone had gone home except for 20 detectives on duty. They assembled all 100 officers. It was midnight. A police detective came to see Lee Gon-sok around 11 p.m. asking for official release documents. It was such an embarrassment that they had to call it a theft case for the time being because he did steal a cell phone. Lee Gon-sok refused to sign it, and that's when the detective told him what really happened and asked for help. He ended up signing the release form, fully knowing that both him and the detective would be punished for falsification of documents if they failed to catch Yoo Young-Chul in time. We meet Kim Sang-jung, detective of the mobile investigation unit. He told his team to check the red light district in Yeongdong-po, knowing that call girls were Yoo Young-Chul's main targets at the time. They spot Yoo Young-Chul about to cross the street. He was about to cross the street when he spotted the detectives on the other side of the crosswalk. They managed to arrest him again. Back at the interrogation room, he says, "Thank goodness you caught me. If I wasn't caught, I'd go on killing at least 100 more people." We meet Kim Hee-suk, forensic officer at Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency. Yoo Young-Chul tried to pick a fight with her, saying, "Who are you? What's a woman doing here? Do you know me? Did you see me? Did you see me at the scene?" He wouldn't talk if she was there because he resented women, so she had to leave the room. Lee Wong-hyuk, a professor of criminal psychology, says it's a common tendency among serial killers to want to brag about it. He said he killed multiple women and cut them up into 17 to 18 pieces and buried them in secret. He believed he needed to punish them in the name of God. There was a forest behind Bongwon Temple. That's where he decided to bury his victims. There were bottle caps on the floor. He said he marked the burial site with bottle caps so he wouldn't have to dig the same place. So they started digging, and that's when they started uncovering bodies. They found the bodies a month after they had been buried, so the flesh and bones were still intact. Yoo Young-Chul proudly said on television that he was the culprit. And I quote, "I hope this teaches women a lesson that they shouldn't be sluts. I hope this teaches the rich a lesson as well."
2000년과 2004년 불과 2년 동안 20명을 잔인하게 살해했습니다. 피해자 대부분은 노인과 부녀자들로 유흥업 종사자와 부유층에 대한 빗나간 적개심이 범행 이유였습니다.
사이코패스라는 개념이 우리나라에 적용된 것은 유영철 때부터입니다. 유영철은 완전 범죄를 기도할 만큼 평균 이상의 지능을 가지고 있었고 희생자에 대한 죄책감이 없었습니다.
이 계기로 여성들이 함부로 몸을 놀리거나 하는 일이 없었으면 하고 부유층들도 좀 각성했으면 합니다.
Kim Mi-suk was told that the only way to identify the victims was through DNA analysis, and that would take 15 days at least. She decides to try to get fingerprints from the victims, which is very difficult. She had tried 160 times and were able to identify the victims that day. This is where they raided his apartment in Sinchon, where he killed all his victims. We now meet Lee Jung-bin, a pathologist at Seoul National University College of Medicine. They found a sledgehammer near his place, however, proving that it was the murder weapon was difficult. If they found no DNA evidence on the hammer, and if Yoo retracted his confession during his trial, it could become a big issue. They scraped inside with a knife to get samples and sent them off to be tested. The next day, they get the results. DNA was found to help the police connect Yoo to the unresolved murder of An Jae-son, a vendor who was found dead in a burnt van in Wonmi-do, Incheon. The body of Hwang Gak-dong vendor was found burnt in his van. His entire body was burnt to a crisp. That case was different from Yoo's MO. Yoo's job in order to make ends meet was to impersonate a police officer. The vendor was killed because he found out he wasn't a real police officer. It's speculated Yoo's goal was to extort money from the victim. Afraid that the handcuffs would leave marks, Yoo cut off the victim's hands and threw them into the sea before setting the van on fire. The body count now is 20. They looked into the most recent unsolved cases to see if Yoo Young-Chul was the culprit of those murders as well. The most famous one being the Imun-dong murder. A woman who was working at Dongdaemun Market was attacked for no reason as she was leaving her place in Imun-dong and was beaten to death. Rumors spread that a police officer from the precinct told Yoo that they'd take care of his son until he graduates from college if he pleaded guilty to this specific case. Quote, "The Imun-dong case, yes, I admit that I was short-sighted. I thought it was the last thing I could do for my son. Think about it. They said they'd take care of my child until he graduates from college." In December 24, Yoo Young-Chul was convicted of 20 murders and was sentenced to death. He was acquitted of the Imun-dong murder and was cleared of any involvement in the southwestern murders. He is still currently on death row.